The yellow Lamborghini rolled through downtown like liquid gold in the morning sun. Officers William Reed, Wayne Clark, and Michael Snyder thought they knew exactly what they saw. A black man behind the wheel of a $250,000 car. Drug money. Stolen property. Another arrogant criminal who needed to be reminded of his place. With practiced authority and cruel certainty, they initiated the stop, hands already moving toward their weapons, smirks already forming as they prepared to execute their routine. Humiliate. Control. Dominate. To them, it was another day of enforcing what they believed was the natural order, protected by badges and a system that had always shielded their misconduct. But arrogance is blinding. What they didn't know was that the man they were about to handcuff, degrade, and drag across hot metal in front of cameras was Simon Moore, the federal prosecutor who would stand before a judge in 4 hours with 2 years of evidence documenting their pattern of abuse. Their reckoning wasn't coming. It had just pulled them over. Before we continue, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because more interesting stories are coming your way and you don't want to miss them. The morning sun cast sharp angles across Simon Moore's bedroom as he stood before his mirror, adjusting his gray Tom Ford tie with practiced precision. Today wasn't just another trial. It was the culmination of 2 years investigating officers Reed, Clark, and Snyder. Documented patterns of racial profiling, false arrests, and manufactured evidence that had destroyed dozens of lives. His fingers smoothed the silk fabric, each movement deliberate and measured. He chose the suit deliberately. Professional, commanding, the kind of armor that announced he belonged in any courtroom, behind any wheel. The weight of 38 years, 15 spent fighting his way through a federal prosecutor's office that hadn't always welcomed his presence, settled on his shoulders as he gathered his briefcase. His badge, secured in its leather case, represented not just authority but every case he'd won, every defendant he'd faced down, every assumption about who he was supposed to be that he'd shattered. The morning air was cool as he stepped into the parking garage, his leather shoes echoing against concrete. Simon had always loved this car, the Lamborghini Aventador he'd purchased after his first major conviction. Some colleagues called it flashy, inappropriate, too much. Simon called it freedom, the right to enjoy success without apologizing for it, without making himself smaller to comfort those who saw his accomplishments as threats. The engine roared to life with a sound that made his chest vibrate, and he pulled out onto the street, his trial notes already organizing themselves in his mind. Traffic was light through the financial district, the city still waking as he cruised past glass towers reflecting gold in the sunrise. He reviewed the case mentally, witness testimony from victims, body camera footage showing escalation tactics, internal communications proving knowledge of misconduct. Everything was ready. His phone sat silent in the center console. His coffee steamed in the cup holder. His hands rested easy on the leather steering wheel. Then he noticed the patrol car falling in behind him, and his stomach tightened, not with guilt, but with the familiar dread that had accompanied him through 23 previous traffic stops in his life. Only twice had he actually been speeding. He watched in the rearview mirror as the lights began to flash, blue and red painting the morning in the colors of authority. Simon pulled carefully to the curb, hands visible on the wheel, already running through the protocol that had kept him alive through every previous encounter. In his mirror, he watched 2 officers exit their vehicle with a particular kind of swagger, the confident stride of men who believed the system would protect whatever they were about to do. They approached with hands hovering near their weapons, eyes already judging, already convicting. When Officer William Reed tapped his flashlight against the window, Simon looked up and felt his blood turn to ice. He recognized that face. He'd spent months studying that face in photographs, body camera footage, personnel files. These weren't random patrol officers. These were Reed, Clark, and Snyder. His defendants. The men whose careers he was about to end. And from the blank predatory expression on Reed's face, Simon realized with dawning horror. They had absolutely no idea who he was. Simon lowered his window slowly, keeping both hands visible. Reed leaned in close, his breath coffee stale, his eyes already scanning the interior with practiced suspicion. License and registration. Now. No greeting. No explanation for the stop. Just the immediate assumption of authority over someone who'd already been judged and convicted. Of course, officer. Simon's voice was measured, professional. He reached slowly toward his glove compartment, narrating every movement. I'm reaching for my registration now. My wallet is in my jacket pocket. His fingers found the documents, and he pulled out not just his license but his federal prosecutor credentials. The badge and ID card that had opened doors, commanded respect, represented 2 decades of earned authority. Reed snatched the license but barely glanced at the badge. His lip curled. Whose car is this? Where are you coming from? The questions came rapid-fire, accusatory, as if Simon's ownership was already impossible in Reed's mind. The car is mine, officer. I'm coming from my apartment, heading to the federal courthouse. I'm a federal prosecutor, as my credentials show. Yeah, right. Reed's laugh was sharp and dismissive. He held up the badge between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. You can buy these online for $20. Real convenient, having fake federal ID when you're driving a stolen car. Simon felt his jaw clench but kept his voice level. Officer Reed, if you'll just run my information through dispatch, this can be cleared up immediately. My credentials are authentic. I can provide. Officer Reed. Reed's eyes narrowed. How do you know my name? His hand moved toward his weapon, and Simon saw Clark's posture shift on the passenger side. Suddenly alert, suddenly aggressive. Your nameplate, Simon said carefully, though that wasn't how he knew. He'd memorized these men's faces, their badge numbers, their disciplinary records. Officer, I'm asking you to verify my credentials through proper channels. Step out of the vehicle. Reed's tone had shifted from dismissive to hostile. He stepped back, hand resting on his holster. Now. A third patrol car pulled up, and Simon watched Officer Michael Snyder emerge, completing the trio. All 3 of his defendants, converging on him like wolves who'd scented prey. They moved with coordinated aggression, surrounding the Lamborghini in a triangle formation that felt rehearsed, theatrical. This was performance. Intimidation designed to establish dominance and humiliate. Simon noticed movement at the corner. A woman with a phone raised, filming. Then another pedestrian stopped. Then a man across the street. A small crowd was beginning to form, drawn by the spectacle of 3 officers surrounding a luxury car, their body language screaming confrontation. Officer Reed, Officer Clark, Officer Snyder, Simon said clearly, his voice carrying to the gathering phones. I am Simon Moore, Assistant United States Attorney. I am fully cooperating. I am asking you to verify my credentials through your dispatch before this escalates further. Reed's face flushed. You're asking. You don't get to ask anything. You're refusing to comply with a lawful order. Get out of the car before I drag you out. I am not refusing. I'm simply requesting. Out. Now. Reed's hand was on the door handle, yanking it open. Clark moved to the passenger side, his palm slapping against the window. Snyder positioned himself at the front of the vehicle, blocking any forward movement. The phones around them multiplied. 5 cameras, then 7, then more. Simon saw them in his peripheral vision, witnesses to whatever was about to happen. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his mind went cold and clear. He was about to experience exactly what 47 other men had described in their complaints. Except this time the world would be watching. And these officers had no idea they were filming their own destruction. Simon stepped out slowly, hands raised at chest level, every movement deliberate and visible. "I am complying, officers. I am unarmed. My hands are." "He's refusing to comply." Reed's voice boomed toward the gathering crowd, toward the cameras, creating a false narrative in real time. "Sir, place your hands behind your back." "I am complying," Simon started, but Clark was already moving, grabbing his arm with unnecessary force and wrenching it backward. Simon felt the practiced violence in the grip. This was muscle memory for them, the casual brutality of men who'd done this dozens of times before. "Hands behind your back," Clark barked, though Simon's hands were already moving there. The handcuffs came out fast, metal clicking around his wrists with deliberate tightness that made him wince. Too tight. Intentionally too tight. The kind of pain designed to humiliate, to remind him of his powerlessness. They spun him around and pressed him forward against the Lamborghini's hood. The metal was scorching from the morning sun, heat searing through his Tom Ford suit jacket. Simon heard fabric tear as Reed shoved harder, his cheek pressed against burning yellow paint, his arms twisted at an angle that sent pain shooting through his shoulders. "I am Simon Moore, Assistant United States Attorney," he said clearly, projecting his voice toward the phones he could see recording. "Badge number on my credentials. I am requesting you contact the federal prosecutor's office to verify my identity." "Sure you are, buddy." Snyder's voice dripped with mockery as he opened the driver's door and began rifling through the interior. "And I'm the president." "Clark, check the trunk. Guys like this always keep their stash in the trunk." "There are no drugs in my vehicle," Simon said, his voice strained from the pressure against his back. "This is an unlawful search. I do not consent." "We've got probable cause," Reed said, his knee pressing into Simon's lower back. "Suspicious behavior, fake credentials, refusing to comply. That's all we need." Simon watched upside down as Snyder pulled open his briefcase, scattering legal documents across the leather seats. Trial notes, evidence folders, witness statements, everything he'd prepared for today's hearing, now being treated like contraband. Clark popped the trunk, rummaging through the emergency kit and gym bag Simon kept there. "Nothing here," Clark called out, sounding almost disappointed. "Check under the seats," Reed ordered. "These types are smart about hiding it." These types. The words hung in the air, naked and revealing. Simon felt the familiar rage building in his chest, the same rage he'd learned to suppress in 23 previous stops, the same rage that 47 complainants had described feeling as they were profiled, searched, violated. But this time, he channeled it into cold documentation. "Officers Reed, Clark, and Snyder," Simon said, his voice steady despite the pain in his wrists and shoulders. "You are conducting an unlawful search without probable cause. You have refused to verify my federal credentials. This encounter is being recorded by multiple witnesses. I am requesting you contact Assistant Director James Walsh at the Federal Prosecutor's Office. His direct number is—" "Shut up," Reed hissed near his ear. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, and possession of fraudulent federal credentials. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." The handcuffs bit deeper into Simon's wrists as Reed hauled him upright. His suit jacket hung torn at the shoulder. Sweat mixed with the heat burn on his cheek. But Simon's mind remained ice-cold and precise, cataloging every detail, every violation, every word. They were giving him everything he needed. They just didn't know it yet. The crowd had swelled to at least 20 people now, forming a loose semicircle around the scene. Phones were raised like a forest of witnesses, every angle covered, every moment captured. Simon could hear the quiet commentary. What did he do? He wasn't doing anything. They just pulled him over for driving that car. A woman's voice cut through, sharp and indignant. This is wrong. He's not resisting. He's been cooperating the whole time. Snyder's head snapped toward her. Ma'am, step back or you'll be arrested for obstruction of justice. This is official police business. I'm standing on a public sidewalk recording police activity, which is my constitutional right, she shot back, her phone steady. And I'm watching you violate his. Simon felt a surge of gratitude toward this stranger. Her voice would be on the recording. Her objection would be time-stamped. Evidence. Officers Reed, Clark, and Snyder, Simon said, his voice carrying across the street. Badge numbers 724, 518, and 693, respectively. No probable cause has been stated for this stop. Handcuffs have been applied excessively tight, causing loss of circulation. Unlawful search of my vehicle is currently in progress. I have repeatedly identified myself as Assistant United States Attorney Simon Moore and requested verification through proper channels, which has been denied. He was speaking for the cameras now, creating an audio record that would survive any attempt to alter the narrative. Each statement was precise, factual, impossible to misinterpret. This was what he'd been trained to do: survive first, document second, seek justice third. Reed's face darkened. He grabbed Simon's arm and yanked him away from the Lamborghini, pushing him toward the patrol car with enough force that Simon stumbled. You're really piling on charges here, friend. Obstruction, resisting arrest, creating a public disturbance. Keep running your mouth and we'll add disorderly conduct. I am not resisting, Simon said calmly, though his pulse hammered in his ears. I am documenting this encounter for the record. I am cooperating fully. You're interfering with our investigation, Clark added, positioning himself to block the crowd's view. You match the description of a suspect involved in several luxury car thefts in this district. It was a lie, manufactured in real time, and Simon recognized the tactic from the case files. Create justification retroactively. Establish narrative control. Make the victim's word less credible than the officer's report. Simon's mind operated on two levels now. The surface level maintained survival protocol. Stay calm, keep hands visible, don't give them legal justification for violence. But underneath, his prosecutor's brain was working at full capacity. He was cataloging every procedural violation, every false statement, every tactical move that mirrored the 47 complaints he'd documented over 2 years. The pattern was identical. The script was the same. These men had done this so many times they didn't even recognize they were following a formula. And now they were doing it to the one person who'd studied that formula with obsessive precision. My vehicle registration is in the glove compartment and clearly lists me as the registered owner, Simon said. I have provided my driver's license with my correct address. I have explained my identity and occupation. At no point have I been informed what crime I'm suspected of committing. Reed shoved him harder toward the patrol car, and Simon's torn jacket flapped against his side. His wrists throbbed where the metal cut into his skin. The morning sun beat down on his face, and sweat traced down his temples. But his voice remained steady, his documentation relentless, because he knew something these officers didn't. In 4 hours, their positions would reverse completely. And every camera now recording their arrogance was creating the evidence that would destroy them. The patrol car that pulled up wasn't responding to a call. Sergeant David Torres had heard the radio chatter and seen the crowd forming from 2 blocks away. He'd spent 28 years on the force learning to recognize when a routine stop had gone sideways, and everything about this scene screamed disaster. Too many phones. Too much agitation in the crowd. And his officers clustered around a yellow Lamborghini like they were making the bust of their careers. Torres stepped out of his vehicle and started toward the scene, his eyes scanning the details. Black man in an expensive suit, handcuffed and pressed against a luxury car. 3 of his officers postured like they'd caught a dangerous criminal. The crowd filming everything with expressions ranging from anger to disbelief. Then Torres got close enough to see the man's face, and his stomach dropped through the pavement. Simon Moore. Assistant United States Attorney Simon Moore. The prosecutor whose face had been in the news for weeks because of the upcoming trial. The trial against 3 officers for civil rights violations. The trial scheduled for this morning. Torres's eyes snapped to his officers' faces, and he felt ice flood his veins as he recognized Reed, Clark, and Snyder. Reed, Clark, Snyder. His voice cut through the scene like a blade. Uncuff him. Now. The 3 officers turned, confusion flickering across their faces. Reed's hand was still gripping Simon's arm. Sarge, we've got a suspect here who. Uncuff him now. Torres's bellow silenced the entire street. He strode forward, and the crowd parted slightly, sensing the shift in dynamics. Step away from that man immediately. Reed's fingers loosened on Simon's arm. Clark fumbled for his handcuff keys. Snyder had gone pale, his eyes darting between Torres and Simon as if trying to solve an equation that wouldn't balance. Sarge, we didn't, Reed started, his voice faltering. He didn't identify himself properly. We thought. He didn't identify himself? Torres's voice was deadly quiet now, the kind of quiet that was worse than shouting. He moved closer, and Simon felt the handcuffs click open, the pressure releasing from his abraded wrists. He showed you his federal credentials and you called them fake. I heard your radio traffic. I heard you refuse to run his information through dispatch. The 3 officers stood frozen, understanding beginning to dawn on their faces like a slow-motion car crash. Reed's complexion had gone from flushed to gray. Clark was staring at Simon as if seeing him for the first time. Snyder's hands were trembling slightly. Do you know who this is? Torres's voice carried to the crowd, to the cameras, to the entire world that would watch this footage. This is Assistant United States Attorney Simon Moore, the prosecutor trying your misconduct case in 4 hours. You 3 just arrested the man who's presenting evidence against you to a federal judge this morning. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crowd seemed to hold its breath. Sarge, we didn't know, Reed's voice cracked. He was in this car and we thought. You thought what? That a black man couldn't own a Lamborghini? You thought you could profile him, humiliate him, and the system would protect you like it always has. Torres looked physically sick. There are 20 witnesses here. There are at least a dozen cameras. You just committed the exact civil rights violation you're being prosecuted for, and you did it to the prosecutor himself. Simon stood rubbing his wrists, his torn jacket hanging off one shoulder, the burn mark from the hood visible on his cheek. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was more damning than any words could be. Reed opened his mouth, but no sound came out. They had just handed Simon Moore the final piece of evidence that would end their careers. And they'd done it on camera, in front of the whole world. Simon brought his hands forward, examining his wrists in the morning light. Deep red grooves circled both, the skin abraded where the metal had cut in. His fingers tingled as circulation returned, that painful pins and needles sensation that confirmed they'd been too tight for too long. Intentionally too tight. Mr. Moore, Reed stepped forward, his hand extended as if they could shake on this, as if professional courtesy could erase what had just happened. I sincerely apologize. We made a mistake. If we'd known. Don't apologize to me. Simon's voice was quiet but carried the weight of a courtroom judgment. He looked at each officer in turn, letting the silence stretch. Apologize to the dozens of men who've stood exactly where I'm standing. The men who didn't have federal credentials to show. The men you treated exactly this way, or worse, who didn't have cameras recording, who didn't have my resources or education or position. He paused. Apologize to them. If you can even remember their names. None of the officers met his eyes. Simon walked back to his Lamborghini, his movements deliberate. He pulled out his phone and photographed the interior. His scattered legal documents, his open briefcase, the violation of his private space captured in high resolution. He documented his torn jacket, the red marks on his wrists, the burn on his cheek from the hood. Each photo was time-stamped, geotagged, evidence that would become part of the permanent record. Torres approached carefully. Mr. Moore, I'll need to file an incident report. If you want to press charges. I'll be filing my own report, Sergeant, with photographic evidence, witness statements, and video documentation. Simon gathered his papers, reorganizing them with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't. Not yet. Not where they could see. Your officers' body cameras were recording, I assume? Torres nodded grimly. Yes, sir. Good. I'll be requesting that footage through proper channels. All of it. Simon closed his briefcase and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was still warm from the sun, his sanctuary violated but reclaimed. He sat for a moment, key in the ignition, letting his breathing steady. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed his lead investigator. James, it's Simon. His voice was controlled, professional, though his hands had started trembling now that he was alone. We have new evidence. Reed, Clark, and Snyder just pulled me over. They arrested me. They did to me exactly what we've been documenting for 2 years. He paused, looking at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Torn jacket, marked wrists, burn on his cheek. Get everyone to the courthouse. We're adding today's incident to the evidence presentation. Jesus. Simon. Are you okay? Do you need? I'm fine. And I'm not going home to change. Simon started the engine, feeling its familiar rumble beneath him. I want the judge to see this. I want them to see what their defendants just did to a federal prosecutor. If they'll do this to me, imagine what they've done to everyone else. He pulled away from the curb, leaving Torres and the 3 officers standing in the street surrounded by witnesses and cameras. In his rearview mirror, he saw Reed with his head in his hands, Clark pacing, Snyder staring at the ground. They were beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. Simon drove toward the courthouse with his torn suit and marked wrists, carrying the evidence of their arrogance in his own body. They'd wanted to humiliate him. Instead, they just documented their own destruction. And in 3.5 hours, the whole world would see it. The emergency motion landed on Judge Patricia Brennan's desk at 2:17 that afternoon, 43 minutes before the scheduled trial. Moore sat in his office reading it on his computer screen, his torn jacket draped over his chair, his wrists still bearing visible marks. The defense attorney's language was carefully crafted, prosecutorial impartiality compromised, personal animus now evident. Emotional involvement precludes objective presentation of evidence. They were arguing that being victimized by the defendants disqualified him from prosecuting them. The logic was perverse, but Moore recognized the strategy. Make the victim the problem. Shift focus from their actions to his response. By 4 o'clock, the police union had assembled a press conference. Moore watched it on the monitor in his office, his jaw tight as the union president stood at a podium flanked by officers in dress uniforms, a wall of blue solidarity. Officer Reed and his colleagues conducted a routine traffic stop this morning following proper protocol, the president read from prepared remarks. The driver failed to properly identify himself and became confrontational. Our officers showed remarkable restraint in a volatile situation. This appears to be a calculated attempt by Mr. Moore to manufacture evidence for a case that lacks merit. The questions from reporters came fast. One voice rose above the others, but witnesses say Moore repeatedly identified himself and showed his credentials. We dispute that characterization. Our officer's account will be fully documented in their report. Moore's phone buzzed. A text from James. They're trying to delete the body cam footage. We got a court order 10 minutes ago. Files are secured. By evening, sympathetic media pundits had picked up the narrative. Moore flipped through news channels, hearing his own story distorted beyond recognition. Why was a federal prosecutor driving a $250,000 car through downtown? It raises questions about judgment, about priorities. Some are suggesting Moore deliberately created this confrontation to strengthen his case. The timing is certainly convenient. These officers approached what they believed was a suspicious vehicle. Are we now saying police can't do their jobs? Moore's team worked through the night in the conference room. Sarah Chen, his lead investigator, had contacted every witness, collecting cell phone footage from 17 different angles. Marcus Williams, his junior prosecutor, was syncing timestamps across videos, body cameras, and dispatch recordings. The evidence was overwhelming. Dispatch recordings confirm they never ran your credentials, Marcus reported at midnight. Reed called in the stop but specifically avoided requesting verification when you told them to check. Body camera footage shows you presenting your badge at the 3-minute mark, Sarah added. Reed's audio clearly captures him calling it fake and something you buy online. Then at the 19-minute mark, right after Sergeant Torres arrives, there's a 5-second gap in Snyder's footage. They tried to delete the recognition moment. Traffic cameras. Moore asked. Show full compliance. Proper pullover procedure. Hands visible. No sudden movements. You were a model of cooperation. Sarah looked up from her laptop. Simon, this is ironclad. They did everything we've been documenting, but this time we have every angle. Moore stood at his apartment window near 2 in the morning, still wearing his torn suit. The city stretched before him, lights scattered across darkness. He looked at his reflection in the glass. The marks on his wrists had deepened to purple bruises. The burn on his cheek was still visible. The tear in his jacket exposed the white shirt beneath. He'd spent 15 years proving he belonged in rooms that didn't welcome him. Tonight, 3 officers had tried to remind him that credentials meant nothing against the color of his skin. They'd miscalculated. Moore's anger had crystallized into something colder and more dangerous. Absolute determination. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just present evidence of a pattern. He would show the court and the world that pattern made flesh. The courtroom was standing room only by 8:45. Media filled the back rows, cameras prohibited but reporters' notebooks ready. Activists lined the left side wearing shirts that read, "Justice delayed is justice denied." The right side was a sea of blue, off-duty officers in dress uniforms, arms crossed, showing solidarity with Reed, Clark, and Snyder. The defendants sat at the defense table in their own uniforms, freshly pressed, projecting authority even now. Judge Brennan entered at 9 sharp, and Moore stood with his team. He'd chosen to wear the torn suit. The prosecution table had argued against it. It looks theatrical, manipulative. But Moore had overruled them. This wasn't theater. This was evidence. The defense attorney, Marcus Holloway, presented their narrative with polished confidence. Your Honor, this case has always been about a prosecutor with a personal agenda. Yesterday's incident proves it. Mr. Moore created a confrontation by refusing to properly identify himself, by behaving suspiciously, by escalating a routine traffic stop into a media spectacle. My clients showed remarkable restraint in a dangerous situation. They followed protocol. Mr. Moore did not. Holloway played select clips, moments edited to show Moore's voice raised, moments stripped of context. This is a man who wanted to be arrested, who needed to be arrested to salvage a weak case. And now he stands before you claiming victimhood when he orchestrated the entire encounter. The officers in the gallery nodded. Some took notes. They believed their system would protect them because it always had. When Moore stood, the courtroom went silent. He approached the screen where evidence would be displayed, and his presence commanded the space, even in his torn jacket, even with the bruises visible on his wrists. Your Honor, I'm going to present 4 pieces of evidence. I'll let them speak for themselves. First, the cell phone footage. 17 different angles, synced and displayed in a grid. Every video showed the same story. Moore's careful compliance, hands visible, movements narrated. Reed's aggression. Clark's rough handling. The handcuffs applied too tight. The crowd's objections. Moore's repeated identification attempts. Note the timestamps, Moore said quietly. 3 minutes, 17 seconds. I present my credentials. 3 minutes, 19 seconds. Officer Reed calls them fake. Second, the body camera footage with audio enhanced. Moore's voice, clear and calm. I am Simon Moore, Assistant United States Attorney. Reed's response. Sure you are, buddy. And I'm the President. The mockery was undeniable. The dismissal was complete. Third, the dispatch recordings. Your Honor, protocol requires officers to verify credentials when presented. Here's their radio traffic. The recording played, Reed calling in the stop, describing the vehicle, but notably silent when Moore mentioned verification. They never asked dispatch to confirm my identity. They decided I was lying and refused to check. Fourth, the deletion attempt. At 19 minutes, 12 seconds, Officer Snyder's body camera shows a 5-second gap. Our forensic analysis recovered the deleted footage. It shows Sergeant Torres's arrival and the moment of recognition. The courtroom watched as Torres's voice boomed through the speakers. You just arrested the prosecutor trying your case in 4 hours. Then Moore played the final piece. Snyder's body camera, still recording after they thought it was off. The officers huddled by their patrol car, voices low but audible. We're so fucked. That was the prosecutor. Jesus Christ, Reed, you told him his badge was fake. Just stick to the story. Union will back us. Say he didn't identify himself properly. Say he was combative. The gallery erupted. Judge Brennan's gavel cracked like thunder. Moore turned to face the defendants. Reed was staring at the table. Clark's hands were shaking. Snyder looked like he might be sick. They didn't arrest me despite knowing who I am, Moore said, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. They arrested me because of what I look like. They saw a black man in an expensive car and assumed criminality. And that's exactly what they've been doing for years. To people who don't have my credentials, my resources, my voice. Yesterday, they just finally did it to someone who could prove it. Judge Brennan delivered her ruling on the recusal motion without hesitation. The defense argues that Mr. Moore's personal experience disqualifies him from prosecuting this case. I find the opposite is true. He now has first-hand knowledge of the exact pattern of behavior alleged in the original complaint. The motion is denied. This trial will proceed. The evidence Moore's team had compiled was devastating in its comprehensiveness. 47 documented complaints spanning 3 years. 16 false arrests where charges mysteriously disappeared. Body camera footage showing identical escalation tactics across dozens of encounters. And now Moore's own experience. Captured from 17 angles, time-stamped, undeniable. The defense crumbled over 3 days of testimony. Witnesses described stops identical to Moore's. Expert analysts detailed the statistical impossibility of such patterns occurring randomly. The deleted body camera footage destroyed any claim of good faith. when the officer's own conversation. Just stick to the story. Union will back us, played for the jury. Several jurors visibly recoiled. The verdict came back unanimous on all counts. Federal civil rights violations. Conspiracy to violate civil rights. Falsification of official reports. Officers William Reed, Wayne Clark, and Michael Snyder were convicted and led from the courtroom in handcuffs. The same handcuffs they'd used on countless others. The cell phone footage had gone viral within hours of the arrest, igniting national conversation. #driving while black trended for days. News outlets dissected every frame. The Department of Justice announced a comprehensive investigation into the entire department within a week, citing systemic patterns requiring federal intervention. 6 months later, Simon Moore stood in Judge Brennan's chambers, his hand on a leather-bound Constitution, taking the oath of office as a federal judge. At 39, he was one of the youngest appointments in the district's history. The yellow Lamborghini was parked in his designated courthouse spot, gleaming in the afternoon sun. No longer evidence of suspected criminality, but a symbol of earned success that he refused to diminish or hide. Moore's first act as a judge was implementing what the legal community quickly dubbed the Moore Standard. Mandatory body cameras with tamper-proof cloud storage, eliminating the possibility of convenient deletions. Civilian oversight boards granted subpoena power and access to all internal investigations. Public databases tracking officer complaints, use of force incidents, and disciplinary actions. Transparency that had been resisted for decades. Mandatory bias training that didn't just lecture about statistics, but included testimony from people who'd stood handcuffed against hot metal, who'd been profiled, dismissed, violated by those sworn to protect them. The reforms spread beyond his district. Other jurisdictions adopted the Moore Standard. Police academies restructured their training. The culture began shifting. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Moore kept one photograph on his desk in chambers, positioned where he'd see it every morning. The image showed him standing beside his Lamborghini in his torn Tom Ford suit, purple bruises circling his wrists, the burn mark visible on his cheek. His expression was calm, determined, unbowed. He'd had it framed with a caption he'd written himself. They saw a criminal. The system saw a threat. I saw an opportunity to change everything. On days when the work felt overwhelming, when institutional resistance seemed insurmountable, when critics claimed he was overreaching or biased or emotional, Moore would look at that photograph. He'd remember standing on that hot pavement, handcuffed and humiliated, while cameras captured every moment. He'd remember the 47 people whose complaints had been dismissed, whose voices had been ignored, whose dignity had been stripped away without witnesses or recourse. And he'd remember that 3 officers had miscalculated catastrophically when they looked at a black man in a luxury car and saw only what their prejudice allowed them to see. They'd wanted to remind him of his place. Instead, they'd put him in a position to redefine what justice looked like for everyone who came after. The yellow Lamborghini remained in its courthouse spot, a daily reminder that success and dignity and justice don't belong to some people. They belong to everyone.